Darren,
Cool.
thanks for joining us. Great to see you in faraway, for most Formula One fans, in faraway New Zealand. I think we should start with that, really, because that was obviously a big thing for you to choose to leave the European sphere of Formula One and base yourself in New Zealand. How's it worked out? Let's not talk about COVID because we all know about all the issues that would have come up over COVID. But in general, how's it working out now?
Yeah, sure. It's working out pretty well. It means long flights, but heck, everyone who shoots Formula One or covers Formula One or works in Formula One has to shoot, has to fly long distances. But it's a beautiful place to come home to. So life here is pretty wonderful, to be honest.
What are your, just as an upshot from that, what are your feelings about the Formula One logistics, the way they put the calendar together, the way the carbon trail leaves its mark around the world?
Well, I don't want to be controversial as far as carbon footprints and those kind of things are concerned, but to be honest, I'm not someone who's completely on side with the whole green agenda, if I'm perfectly honest. And my big bugbear really is hypocrisy, and I have a problem with, in general in life, and I have a problem with a sport such as Formula One, um, which is obviously burns a lot of carbon. They're trying to do certain things, to increase or to lower that level of carbon footprint, which I'm all on side with, but in a realistic way. And when the teams and their cohorts of the great armada of people that flies all around the world, the trucks, the catering staff, the mechanics, the team engineers, the team bosses, not to mention the drivers, and all the press, of course, when we all collectively fly around the world, there's a massive carbon footprint. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that this year, what we had 22 races, next year 24 are scheduled. I think the calendar is way too many. I think the sweet spot for me and probably for you, Peter, because you're a bit older than me, but similar generations, I think is around 18. I think that's a pretty good number. That would obviously mean that our carbon footprint is considerably lower. Obviously, we've got races in the Middle East and the Far East that we didn't have back in the day, but I wholly subscribe to that being a good idea. I think that Formula One should spread its wings into different territories and markets, but and not be European centric, which perhaps it was. And to go back to your previous question, that's kind of one of the reasons that I thought I can bring my family to this side of the world, because a lot of the races are came this way. So I just feel that on a personal level, personal for me and personal for all my friends and colleagues within the sport, that 24 races there's burnout. There's real burnout of people in the sport. And I think you said not to mention COVID, but one of the upshots, one of the really nice upshots of me not doing races was that I got more of a sitting here watching races in the middle of the night. I became without the paddock rather than within, which I'd been for 30 odd years. And I really got a sense of, through conversations I had on particularly Instagram with lots of dyed-in-the-wool supporters who became aware that I wasn't at the races. So they reached out, and we were, during the races, having great conversations about what was happening. They were asking me, I was asking them. And I really got a sense that as the races were increasing in number and the distance or the gaps between races became shorter, i.e. every weekend, it seems at some stages of the year now, that there's something of a tiredness, something of a kind of over familiarity with it's another race. Why would I watch the race this weekend when I've got the Italian Grand Prix next weekend? And after that, I've got the Baku Grand Prix, or I've got the Mexican, then I've got the US. And it just in general, I think, gives people less chance. Las Vegas was a perfect example. We may come on to talk about that, but it was an incredible event on so many levels. But immediately we were left Vegas that night on Saturday, everything is packed out. Everyone is desperate to get to Abu Dhabi. You have no time to reflect on what came before. And I think that's a big part of our sport. There was so many podcasts. There's so much good writing made about the sport. People like yourselves discussing for days. You probably get, I know you get a lot of comments from interaction with people. And we just don't get any chance before we're back in the paddock, or people are back on watching on TV at the next one. And it would be nice to have some gap between.
Let's talk about Vegas, because, yeah, I'm very keen to get your thoughts on Vegas as an event, as a race track, and whether we're going in the right direction with races like that?
Yeah, as I said, I'm a fan of Formula One going to new territories and new countries and new markets and exposing itself to new people. Obviously, with the Netflix series, we've opened up that whole kind of market of the America. The sport collectively, if you like, has a number of feelings about that, but is enthralled to the American market. And I think Vegas, I went there did a bit of a road trip with one of my best friends through the kind of California desert and through Nevada. And we made a bit of a trip of it, which was great fun. When we finally got there, we both had the attitude of let's be positive. Let's not go in with this kind of overly negative attitude that I think a lot of us, especially in the older generation of the sport, can have to the way that the sport is now. And the scale of it really hit me like a brick bat. I really I'd been to Vegas a number of years before, a number of times, but when one sees just the logistics involved, the construction involved, that Liberty Stroke F1 had managed to carry out, and all the politics with the three main casino backers and the casino group backers, and all the kind of local politics, I thought they did an incredible job. As far as the circuit is concerned, it was a little bit simpler than perhaps I'd hoped in a photographic way, which is obviously how I look at most circuits in a purely visual way, first and foremost. It was really, as a photographer, you're looking for lots of corners, because obviously cars do things, as you very well know, in corners, and that provides photographic opportunity. Vegas really was devoid of many corners, so it was quite a simple task as a single photographer, and I can imagine as the multi-staffed the multi-staffed agencies go, you could almost overcover the race. You could tick off every location and every vantage point quite quickly.
Next question, let me butt in there and say, just on that, there's obviously, it looks to us laymen in terms of photographics, that there are fewer and fewer opportunities to get a camera through the wire mesh fencing. The holes are fewer. Yeah. There are more photographers clustered in one place. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does it mean that you've got to be really good to come up with a shot, or is it neutralizing it?
It's a good question, and observant of you. We've got a kind of a situation where obviously with safety, that's a paramount concern. I understand that. And when people look at pictures back in the day, obviously photographers could basically stand anywhere. Now we're kind of corralled into particular areas. Somewhere like Las Vegas is always a bit of a kind of learning experience, because you have security guards and not particularly marshals, but more security guards who are very worried about where you can stand. They don't really know the pass situation. They don't know the tabards or the photo vests and where you can go. We know, perhaps not wishing to sound arrogant, but we perhaps know better than they do. But of course, they have the power. And that, as you correctly said, means that photographers can be kind of corralled into similar areas. But you know me well, Peter, and over my 35 years shooting it, I've always had the attitude that good photographers will find good places. There's no point in bitching and moaning about there's no holes here, or I can't get in that building, I can't do this. You've got to do it yourself. So thinking ahead through Vegas, it was particularly obvious to me, and I think a number of my colleagues and other photographers, that really you had to secure some kind of elevated vantage point. You had to get up high. And I started working on that months before, trying to find out what was available, people who'd been there, people who had got more experience of being in Vegas lately. And of course, you know that the TV crews have done recce's, so you talk to people and try and negotiate your way into rooms or balconies and that kind of thing. And that did prove to be the key, because the Strip, with all the casinos and the hotels and the Bellagio and the fountains and Caesars and Wynn and Trump in the background, was just the shot. And I was pretty pleased with what I managed to get. It
was a night race, obviously, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on that trend in Formula One as well, towards night racing. And I'm guessing again that there's a moment when the sun's just going down and the light is beautiful and you're getting great shots. But actually they're not going to stand up 3 days later when everybody wants the race shot, which was at night. That's a frustrating thing, A. And B, what do you think about shooting at night and the night races?
Well, shooting at night, I'm pretty thankful that we've got digital technology, because back in the day, if we had to shoot the races now that we do with film and transparency, it would be incredibly hard. So that's a real plus point. And as far as shooting at night is concerned, I think different races, interestingly, lend themselves to it better than others. Bahrain, I used to really quite like as a daytime race. Obviously, we've had that transition into a kind of dusk night, sunset nighttime race, much like Abu Dhabi. And I think Bahrain did a fantastic job of moving into that, lighting the rocks, lighting the wadis, and the water pools and stuff. And they really put some thought and process into that. I think the best is Singapore. I think that race went from, what was it, 2009 was the first race. It went from no race to blue ribbon race overnight, and no pun intended. And of course, the absolute crowning piece of that is the fact that you've got cars with not as many glossy color schemes as I'd like, a bit too much black these days, but they just seem to come alive under the lights. Vegas was good, but I think I'm interested to hear what people thought looking from afar, because being close up and being next to the cars, it felt almost, even though the lights were bright and there's something like the sphere was incredible, an incredible thing to see, the scale of it and the light it provided, but it almost had the feel of a car park. And that's not meant to relate back to the 81, 82 Caesars Palace races, which obviously were in car parks, as you know, but it still had that kind of feel. And I think they could do a slightly better job in getting a sense of the place, maybe across on television. I don't know. I didn't see it really on television, but that's how it looked to me.
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's a good point. But I think the difference between the look of the cars on a television screen and the look of the cars as seen through the lens of a Darren Heath is so vast. It's a much bigger difference in a night race than in any other situation, as you've touched upon. And that's the problem, of course. It all comes down to television and making sure all the logos are visible, the reasonably good camera angles, and they're going to get all the overtakes, and not necessarily in that order either. And that really trims it down in terms of what they can do artistically.
Yeah. And as you do too, I know a number of the TV cameramen pretty well, and they're almost, I don't want to get them into trouble, but they're almost a slightly frustrated, artistic bunch of guys, who really want to do creative imagery, creative moving imagery. They're much like stills photographers, but with moving cameras, but incredibly high quality cameras. But I know that if they start doing some of the stuff that doesn't show the sponsors in the background, the sponsors who've paid lots of money to be visible, that there'll be trouble. So yes, I think that can. I think I've heard other commentators talk about this in the past, that when one sees on Instagram or whatever social media platform one interacts with, that when you see pictures of, say, Senna qualifying at Monaco, or you see Prost qualifying at Adelaide, or Schumacher, or pick your driver, it seems far more kind of dynamic and noisy and things going on, and it seems to give more of a sense of what it's like as a racing driver. Nowadays, apart from that in-camera helmet cam, which I think is really good, although at night races it does suffer from a lot of flare and reflections, but I really feel that they've almost become too good. They've almost become too clinical, and the quality, and it's slightly not dumbed it down, but I feel that Formula One cars up close, and I'm obviously for many years have been so fortunate to do that and still am. Up close, they are incredible machines. The downforce through the corners, the braking, the acceleration now is just monstrous. And I think that Formula One TV coverage misses something. I don't know what it is. I'm not trying to tell someone what to do, because I know they work very hard on it, but I think it almost misses something.
Well, for me, it's the word violence. A Grand Prix car is a violent animal when it's moving. Yeah. Whereas there's a big difference between violence and vibration, or turbulence.
Sure.
It's interesting to hear what you say, almost repeating the words of Pierre Gasly when I was chatting to him relatively recently, when he was saying that he actually gets an adrenaline rush every time he gets in the car, even if he's on a circuit on his own, just tire testing or whatever, just accelerating out of the pits gives him the adrenaline rush. And that moment is the moment he thinks, yes, I'm so glad I'm a Formula One driver.
Isn't that great to hear?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think we are all, whether we're from afar or up close, from within or without the paddock, we're all at heart racers. You know, people who watch on TV, people who write about it, photograph it, work on the cars. We're all at heart racers. And I think that sometimes the drivers, mentioning no names, but certain drivers might look a little bit blasé about how many races they're winning, or moaning about this or moaning about that. Of course, we've all got, you know, relative to things happening in the world, we've all got our own problems. But I sometimes feel that you wonder, I find myself wondering, do these drivers actually appreciate it? Do they enjoy it? When they get in a car, do they really get that sense of occasion? I think that sometimes when they leave Formula One, you hear certain drivers from the recent past, they'll talk about how special it is and how wonderful it is. So hearing the fact that Pierre Gasly says that is kind of restores your faith a little bit.
I suspect, in a way, when Lewis is in Grenada or wherever over the winter and he's swimming or doing this or doing that, that's also probably what he misses. He's probably just a kid at heart that just still loves sitting in a Formula One car and driving it. Obviously, he wants
I hope so.
But I said, I can't imagine that he could have been motivated to stay in it for this long unless it was something as raw as that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How drivers will talk about, and I know plenty of press people, myself included, who will say things like, "Oh, when I'm 50, I'm done with it. I'm not going to chase round, you know, multi-millionaire children as an old man." But of course, it's in your blood. You can't leave it. It doesn't matter. You just want it. And I think that Hamilton is a perfect example of that. That he has all these other things that he could go to, whether they'll be a success or not when he actually loses that star appeal of being a Formula One superstar, and whether he can get back to winning ways, we'll see. But obviously he doesn't want to leave.
No, it's interesting. Darren, I got to ask you, sprint races, the specter of reverse grid races, perhaps? Thoughts?
I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, Peter. I really don't like sprint races. I've tried. There's something in me that kind of, you know, I'm not averse to change. I think it's important for the evolution of our lives, and including sport. But it just seems a little bit, not contrived, but for me, and I know perhaps the newer generation are different. I've heard some commentators talking about this, some of the newer journalists, that qualifying doesn't mean so much to them. It's all about the race. For me, as a boy, as a teenager, as a young man, as a photographer, the absolute high point of the weekend, obviously I get excited to do the grid and I get excited at the start, but then it becomes a process of covering. But the actual, as a fan, what brings out my little boy at the fence at Silverstone or Brands Hatch is when the quickest of the quick are on track. And qualifying is that. And it doesn't matter, you know, what circuit it is, but that's what I want to see. And I think that sprint races, and I know there's a lot of people trying to look into how they can improve the format and make it work for people, but it messes up Friday, it messes up Saturday, and it degrades Sunday for me. So I found myself at races that I'm not covering. I don't even engage. I watched the Friday qualifying for the Sunday race, apologies. But I'm not really interested in what I see as this kind of contrived race for I don't know, for me, why not have Friday qualifying and Saturday qualifying? There was jeopardy there back in the day. Why not go back to something like that? But I know there's cost restrictions.
But I've been pushing for exactly that for many years. To go back to that, it'd be brilliant. And I think the other point, of course, is that traditionalists, if that's the right word, I hate to use it in a way, but people like yourself, and certainly I agree with everything you've just said there, spend most of the sprint race hoping that somebody isn't going to run into the car of the guys who have taken the trouble to qualify well for the Grand Prix. You know, some kid who's looking to do something in the first 3 laps of a sprint race can be out of control, and that's
and we both know that all the mechanics and the engineers are desperate for that not to happen as well.
Yeah.
Everyone is on tender hooks, and just get this silly little race out the way so we can focus on the banner event that makes for the world title.
Yeah, and that's a negative thing in a way, I think, because it's a sort of negative race as distinct from a positive race, and that's one of the problems with it.
Yeah.
Darren, technology, cameras today, how much has your bag changed over the last few years? Bring us up to speed.
Well, I'm something of a dinosaur with the photographers in a number of ways, I guess they would say. But with the actual kit, I'm still using DSLR cameras, which is the older style of digital cameras, rather than the mirrorless versions that people are using now, purely because I've just not felt a need, and there's nothing particularly wrong with the ones that I've got. And also the technology and the camera level is going to be improved imminently. So I may well switch, but I'm still using lenses that I was using 25, 30 plus years ago. It's there's no reason to change. I think a lot of people contact me through Instagram or on email or through my website, asking, should I buy this camera? Should I buy that lens? And of course, I'll give what information I can and help them how I can and give them advice, or they'll ask for what kit I use. But really, you could cover a race effectively if you worked hard enough with one camera and one lens, of one camera body and a 50mm lens, for instance, and then just work hard. And that's the key. So every year I try and trim it down. I try and trim down what I'm carrying because I'm getting older and it gets harder to carry.
But as a photographer, just the art of Formula One, do you think you're a different artist now than you were, say, 5, 10 years ago? Do you think you're evolving, putting aside the technology, putting aside the change in format of the races, the circuits, just you as an individual?
I guess at core level, I have principles when it comes to photography. I try and, in my head, I'm always thinking, push the boundaries, push the boundaries. Obviously, the temptation is maybe to use a faster shutter speed to get more of a hit rate, to get more pictures on a card, or I still think in terms of film on a roll of film. That's showing my age. But I have principles, Peter, that go back to the photographers that I used to climb the stairs at Foyle's book shop in London and find the kind of dusty tones at the top of right at the top, almost in the attic, that were Japanese photographers that I would just sit on the floor for hours just going through these pictures, which were all blurry and which were highlights and which were too dark, but they were different to the ones in Autosport and Motorsport News, which, not to denigrate those, but they were just pictures of cars parked on corners, as I like to say. Whereas these cars, much like we're talking about the in-car footage, they had that ethereal kind of attack on the senses that Formula One is. And that's all I really wanted to do with my photography, is try and get across just what Formula One is.
Well, speaking of ethereal attack on the senses, I was brave enough or perhaps arrogant enough to ask you to select 3 photographs for us, and you've very kindly done that. 3 photographs from this year that you can talk about, and obviously which you're fond of. And I mean, wow, it is just a kaleidoscope of color. And I have to say, looking at it, it's a picture that I would love to hang on my living room wall. Thank you very much. But equally, it is you, I guess, at Vegas, right? And that's your feeling about Vegas.
That's right. That's I went to Las Vegas thinking I've got to get up high, as I described earlier, and that was a vantage point that I felt could work. Went for a recce beforehand, went to see kind of what lens I probably need to use, that kind of thing, what was in the background. I had a pretty good idea beforehand, and it's really, with a shot like that, you're trying to get a sense of the occasion, a sense of all the lights and all the kind of razzmatazz that's going on. But with a car, and it's a technique that I've really tried to work on. The car is tiny in the frame in a percentage sense, but you're trying to make it dominate. So it's the focal point. So you're kind of using the rule of thirds, which all photographers should be aware of. Certainly, all young photographers should study that. Just one of the basic rules of composition. So Max's car is kind of positioned at the bottom left of where the rule of third would be for that particular area. And then it's trying to create around him a kind of, through using a very long shutter speed and a kind of a technique that don't want to go too much into how I've developed it, but it's kind of it's masking the lens during the exposure, and it's moving the camera around, and it can be very hit and miss. It takes a lot of practice. I've done a lot of practice outside of Formula One to get that right, and but when it works, it really pops. It really and that was the shot which I went there in my mind's eye to get.
And do you specifically wanted it to be Max?
Yeah, you know what it's like, Peter.
That limits the number of attempts you have to get it right, correct?
It does, and it was shot in qualifying. So, of course, you've only got a finite amount of laps. Obviously, you're pretty confident that Max is going to get into Q3. So, you've got more than perhaps you would if Logan Sargent, no disrespect to him, but if he was the guy, or he did pretty well in Vegas, didn't he?
He did,
wrong guy to one of the Alpines, I should say. Yeah. So you're fortunate with that, but it goes back to kind of when I started shooting Formula One in the late 80s, that for me as a fan, qualifying really only started. The weekend really only started, but particularly qualifying when Ayrton Senna was on track, because it's when Senna was on track, you knew that he would more often than not set the benchmark. And then latterly, it would be when Schumacher was on track, Michael Schumacher. Then it would be when Montoya or Häkkinen or Raikkonen after that, and then Hamilton, obviously, and then Vettel. So you stagger your work, building up to the big guys, and it's always, as a photographer, I started to get into a situation a few years ago where you'd get so frustrated that I'm getting a lesser car, should we say, always sharp, and not getting the big guns. And it's almost because you tense up a little bit too much. So I actually started to stop shooting the smaller cars and just focus on the big cars, the big drivers, to try and transpose that onto them. But no, it works well, and yeah, it's the result of many years of practice.
Well, you said you do practice away from the track as well. Tell us a little bit how you do that. What form does that take?
As a teenager, I used to go to the local train station or fields near where I grew up, where my father would drop me off, or I'd go out on my bike and I'd stand in the fields or on the train station, and I would use my camera gear to kind of pan with the trains and wide angles, short lenses, all that kind of stuff. And of course, that was in the days of film, so it would cost. So of course, it created a discipline that, as my mother always said, just remember, every picture costs 20 pence or 50p or whatever it used to be, and that still stayed with me. So now it may be when I'm out with my boys playing football or that kind of thing, I might try out different things, get them to do certain things, or cars going by on the freeway. It's just kind of trying to be aware of techniques and things that one can do. Just trying things out. It's a good discipline. I think these days everyone is kind of wants instant gratification and isn't perhaps be prepared to put in the work. We've all got iPhones that will do so much for us in a visual sense, and I think when you've got to kind of work at it, you'll get those rewards.
You mentioned the I word. Do you have the latest possible smartphone that you can have, and do you love all its technology, and do you utilize all its technology?
I've just upgraded. I had a funnily enough, I had an iPhone 7 Plus, which was like something from the dark ages, and it got to a point where I thought, look, I'm active on Instagram, I'm doing these kind of things, I need to kind of have the same technology that perhaps the viewers of my work are having. So that was a kind of a big reason to upgrade. So yeah, I bought an iPhone 15, and I must admit I I use a tenth of what it can do, Peter. You know, like I think most of us, like with computers and all the hardware that we buy. But yeah, it's an impressive piece of machinery. But I won't be using it to cover races.
Right. Picture two. Formula One is not only about cars, it's about people. And there are some people
It
with a
is.
lot of character. And this sums this gentleman up, I think, this photograph.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good point. I think many years ago, when we would opine about Formula One, I think one of us may have said that, or someone that we worked with, Formula One is a people sport. It's just a circus of people that moves around the world and focuses on these incredibly amazing machines. And obviously, certain drivers come along that have more charisma than others, perhaps. There's something about them. They have that star appeal. We all know who they are. And Fernando Alonso is certainly one of them. And I would argue that he's one of the most charismatic drivers of the last, certainly since I've been shooting it, which is close on 35 years. And I have a pretty good relationship with Fernando. When I used to work with McLaren, I got to know him quite well. I got to know him a little bit actually at Ferrari before that, because he asked for one of my pictures from Korea 2010, where he stood on the car and that famous race where, you know, it finished in the dark. And he wanted the picture for his lounge wall, which was honestly this, you can imagine the size of Fernando's lounge. And I sent him the picture, and you know, we did that. So it's always been quite a good relationship. So when in Bahrain this year, you look for a driver that you want to focus on, because we don't get that much chance. The drivers, because of the extended grid period now, ceremonies, the drivers get onto the grid, they take their kit off, wham, they disappear straight into the garages, talk to engineers and to relax before the race. So you've got to really work hard. So I focus on getting a driver that, okay, this time I'm going to focus on Lando. This time I'm going to focus on Logan Sargent, whatever it may be different for different races. This race, it was Fernando. And using a 50mm f1 lens, which is an old piece of kit, but incredibly difficult to use, but very rewarding to use. So you get that fantastic flare that you can see on it, and bokeh, and the way the light works. So obviously you want to use it at night. And Fernando is one of those guys, whether he's just like it with me or whether he's like it with most photographers, which I think is the case, he's absolutely fine with you being really close. Sometimes he may react, but when you're actually in the process of taking pictures, he will just take that, almost that gladiatorial pose of a warrior getting ready for battle. And it's just something about him. There's that old school balaclava that, you know, there are some drivers, mention no names, who don't like to shoot you. They don't like it when you shoot them with balaclavas. But for me, it's all part of that, the armory that they wear, and has kind of evocative feel of the past to me.
And where exactly was Fernando when you took that shot?
He's on the grid. He's actually preparing to get back in the car, because after the national anthems, they come back to the cars, and of course you wait at the guy that you want to get. You wait at that car, and he comes back, and then you do what you do, and then get off the grid before security screams at you.
What do you think, just in passing, what do you think about the way the pre-race ceremony now, and how formal it is compared with how it used to be?
It's too long. I understand that it was lengthened, I believe, for these ceremonies that we have at places like Miami and places like Vegas. I understand that, but it's lost a certain punchiness. I know from talking to the TV guys that they're struggling for people to talk to, because the drivers naturally will disappear, and the engineers and the team bosses, of course, hang around, and you know, there's certain of them that are always happy to talk. But really, talk about Vegas again, but there was a situation at Las Vegas this year. It was very similar to Abu Dhabi, or just a few days later, that it got to a point personally where you've shot the cars coming onto the back of the grid. You've done all the drivers with the dry ice and the flary pictures like the Fernando one, and then they disappear. And then if your brief is to shoot celebrities, which my brief couldn't be further from that. I'm not enthralled to celebrities at all, so it doesn't matter to me at all. I found myself standing on the edge of the grid for 15, 20 minutes, looking around, thinking, what am I going to do? This is such a special occasion. You know what it's like, a Formula One grid. There's nothing more special than it. I wish I could take all my friends and all the people watching this and just show them how fantastic it is, the adrenaline rush and that sense of occasion. But it's lost some of that because it's just A-list to Z-list celebrities walking around, most 99% of which I don't know who they are, and all their hangers-on, walking around, being in the way, mechanics trying to do their work as people are almost falling over the cars. I don't want to be disingenuous. I know why they're there, for more publicity, but in a way it's become too much. And then I look around to my right and to my left, and there's lines of dyed-in-the-wool old school F1 people just standing there with the same blank look on their faces as me, looking at this scene, looking at each other, shaking our heads, just waiting for the drivers to come back to get the national anthem out of the way, and then come back to their cars, and then they can get on with their work. And rush, and then you're all off the grid, and the race starts. And it's, you know, as I say, I understand why it's the case now, but I think it could be trimmed back just a little bit.
Which, of course, touches also the soul of Darren Heath, because I suppose some of us might say, well, why don't you just take Fernando on a Friday or a Saturday then, when there's a lot more space? But of course, that wouldn't work for you, right? Because it has to be the moment.
Well, if only would be my answer to that. Back in the day when we used to do features for F1 racing, of course, we were very fortunate that we could say to Jarno Trulli's people, or we could say to Ralf Schumacher's people, or we could say to even Michael Schumacher's people, can we do this feature? Can we take them there? Can we go jet skiing? Can we do that kind of stuff? That just doesn't happen anymore. And what happens now is that the drivers, they walk into the paddock, some of them wearing fancy outfits, most of them wearing team kit. And honestly, I don't know whether TV have showed it, but the phalanx of photographers that stand to do the drivers swiping their pass and walking down the paddock. And they're forced into doing that almost, because that's the only time you see the drivers. They come to the cars in the garage, which we are not allowed anywhere near, with their helmets on, straight in and straight out. And it's like they're hidden away. You know, back in the day when I started, after qualifying or afternoon practice, FP2, FP3, whatever, you would, about 5 o'clock, you'd have Montoya would come out and have a cup of tea and a piece of cake and talk to us all, and we'd take pictures, and he'd play with our camera gear, and not just him, but Massa would. You know, Michael Schumacher would be there for hours at night. So if you hung around, you could get great shots of him in great light. You know, later on, team bosses talking, all these people that you would just, as we say, fill our boots with pictures. You just can't get that anymore. So you're forced into rushing like mad when you do get a chance.
You mentioned Michael quite a lot. Like, I guess, like all of us, you miss him, and you've got a lot of feel for Michael, correct?
Yeah, it's back in the day, Peter, and I thought about this a lot. Back in the day, I wasn't a great fan. I realized his brilliance. There were obviously controversies surrounding, you know, a number of things that he did. But I think with all the greats, there are, to a lesser or greater degree, there are controversies, because that's what pushes them to be like they are. But as time has passed, and whether it's incredibly sad what happened to the poor man, but that's kind of almost beside the point, because what's happened is that time has passed. And when I look back and see the Netflix documentary, I see old footage or old races that I might play while I'm editing pictures, because I'm a fan at heart of the sport. I just feel that those cars back in the day, and I don't want to wear rose-tinted glasses, I believe in you know, living in the moment, but they just, you mentioned violence earlier, they just look like these monsters that we're trying to tame, these V10, V12, pick your engine size, screaming cars that with almost, and this is not to be disingenuous to the current crop of drivers, because I think they're particularly good, but you had the Sennas, the Mansells, the Prosts, the Schumachers, the Vettels earlier on, Berger. You know, I don't know. They just seemed to be. I don't know. You had different winners. Obviously, when Ferrari got really into their pomp, they were winning a lot of stuff. But still, you had Montoya nipping at the heels. You had Ralph, his brother. You had the McLarens, DC and Mika, and I don't know. It just seemed to be a bit better. And I think as time has passed, I appreciate Michael Schumacher and what he did more as time has passed.
Let's move on to your third choice of image, Darren. Looks like another 3 times world champion Max Verstappen there.
It is, yeah. It's turn 1, 2, 3 at Abu Dhabi at Yas Marina, and a shot that a lot of photographers try and go for. It's quite a hard picture to do. The slower the shutter speed that you use, and it's trying to get Max as he comes through that corner. You shoot every car, obviously, but you're trying to get the world champion or the team that you're working for as the banner shot. And you've got, post the race starting, you've probably got about 10 laps maximum. So you shoot the first corner and then you rush up the hill, go into the palm trees, put on a wide angle lens, and then try and nail it. And you've got about 10 laps before that sun has gone. And of course, there's about 2 laps where it's absolutely bang on. And the sun is just still visible, and the sky is starting to go that gorgeous kind of different shades of yellow, purple, blues, you know, into deep night. And yeah, that's the shot, and it's framed with the palm trees, which of course is a kind of signature of that part of the world.
And he's traveling pretty quickly right there.
He's a fair whack, yeah.
I mean, that's where Carlos Sainz shunted, right?
That's right. That's exactly where Carlos shunted it. Yeah, where they smoothed out the bump that he hit.
How near or far from the track are you there?
Probably because it's a very wide angle lens, so I'm probably 25 yards, something like that, maybe 30 yards. It's not particularly close shot, because the way that the physics of a picture like that work is that when you're very close, it can kind of counterintuitive what people may think, it can work against you. You want the cars to be further away, not too far, but you know, there's a sweet spot. And of course, you want the car to be at a constant speed. It's much easier. People ask me, should I do my panning pictures on corner entry, corner exit, or apex? Apex is probably best, or corner exit. Corner entry, where cars are braking, and of course they brake so late nowadays and with such force that it's very difficult to keep the camera moving at the same and slowing down at the same speed that they are. So it's much easier at that kind of, you know, linear acceleration as they leave the corner or as they're powering through.
But am I correct in saying the key to that shot is the pin sharp focus of one specific point? And would you say that was a little bit of a Darren DNA anyway?
I think, you know, every photographer's trying to get the car sharp. I'm trying, perhaps in I'd say a majority of my pictures, to get them sharp at very slow shutter speeds, because it goes back to that, as I said about sitting at foils, looking at Japanese photographers that I can't remember the names of, that just that sense of passion and feeling. You know, for me, it's not about every shot has to be pin sharp, because that's not kind of reality to me.
Darren, absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to throw a couple of questions at you that I imagine some of my regular viewers might want to ask you. And I personally get quite a lot of questions about, I want to go to a Grand Prix. Where would you suggest I go? What's a good circuit for watching and going to? So let me ask you that first of all. And I suppose in that you can also say a race in which you're also feeling quite comfortable and you enjoy going to as well as an event.
One of the races, and I did this with my own family, one of the races that I feel is probably the best, certainly it's right up there, would be the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. Great city, great place to visit, even when there's not a Grand Prix, as you very well know. And as a the reason I wanted to go is that because I could stand next to the track shooting the cars through the holes in the fences, and my boys and my wife could stand 1.5 yards away from me. There's no other circuit like it. Perhaps Singapore at a couple of locations, but there's no other circuit like the Australian one for the crowd being so close. And I think really getting a sense of the noise of the cars, the heat, the braking, the almost, you can see into the cockpits if you stand at turn 3, for example. You get a great view through 3, 4, and 5. And I think that really works. But I appreciate that that's a long way to come for most of the European, UK-based viewers. But that would be one of my top ones. As far as a favorite place, I think I said earlier that Singapore is right up there. But to be honest, and I hope this is not avoiding the question, but I think all Grand Prix have merit to them. I think they all, everyone loves Spa. Suzuka for me is peerless, absolutely peerless as a racetrack, as a place. You know what it's like. The Japanese fans everyone talks about, but it's not just that. It's that early 60s kind of, or mid 60s Hugenholtz design track that is tight and small and twisty. Is the greatest test of driver ability. And that's not just me that says it. Vettel says it, Button says it, Hamilton says it, Senna said it, and you can go on. And there's an atmosphere there. There's an atmosphere that is like no other. And I just like you, I get many people saying I'm going to this track, or it's my dream to go to my bucket list of races. Would you suggest, I've got these, which one would you suggest? I'll always say, if you want to see the cars close up, Melbourne, if you want to go for a special place and just drink in atmosphere, then go to Suzuka.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Certainly. I love Suzuka. I love the whole Japanese visit as well. The trains, people, the city. Wonderful. And Darren, this next question, completely hypothetical, but it comes off something you said earlier, when in the old days they could basically take photographs from wherever they wanted. If that was still the situation today, where would Darren, what do you think? What would be what in your mind you think, oh, well, then I could get my picture from there, or this corner, or that corner on this track. I could do what I wanted. One idea, for example, one great shot is to be on the back of the grid, right? Because it's not exactly dangerous to be on the back of the starting grid. I don't know why they don't allow people like you there to take the odd picture, but anyway, but that would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would, and there are kind of, I talked about a bucket list. There are my bucket list of pictures, if you like, that I would like to do, which I've probably ticked off 3 or 4 out of the, say, 5 in my career. But they're not, they're kind of access rather than being really close. It's interesting you asked that, because immediately I think back to corners, say at Monaco, where cars are coming out of the high top Mirabeau circle corner, for instance, when they blast the accelerator just before going into, I know it's not supposed to call it lows anymore, but whatever it's called now, into lows. Those kind of, that on TV might not look particularly impressive. Everyone might think that the Eau Rouge into Raidillon is the place you would stand, and that would be pretty high up. But when one sees pictures of Clark, Rindt, Stewart, coming through there, and there are photographers literally on the apex, I think my sense of self-preservation would stop me perhaps doing that. Maybe when I was younger, it wouldn't, but it's. I think what I would
be
like
all right with Jim Clark. There's no way he'd come anywhere near you. He'd be a couple
of
inches away, waving at you as he did so with full opposite lock.
Well, when you see some of the older guys' pictures of is there one at Rindt at Silverstone where he's slight opposite lock and he's basically pointing at the photographer, but he's doing 140 miles an hour. Just, oh man, I get a rush just talking about it. That would just be, I would fill up doing that.
That shot behind you, Hungary maybe?
Which one?
Well, it's to your right, I guess.
This one.
Yeah.
That's John Lacey in Hungary in 1991, and it's when I used to work for an agency called Zoom Photographic back in the day, and we had a tremendous amount of work, and it was all commercial work basically. So we were working for Marlboro, we were working for Shell, and we were working for Courtaulds, and we were working for Tyrrell and Braun, and all these things. So you had to do all your pictures were thinking of the sponsor, and the photographer that I worked for who owned the agency was particularly kind of keen on those kind of commercial car parked on corner pictures, and he was very good at that. But it wasn't really what floated my boat. But of course, I had to fulfill the brief. So Sunday morning warm up, which your younger viewers will not know what that is, but Sunday morning warm up was a fantastic treat for photographers. So at about, and I know you know this, Peter, about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, cars would come out and they'd have 30 minutes to go around. So generally the top drivers, the kind of the number one, the lead drivers from the team would do one lap in their T car, set that up, or confirm the setup, get out literally in the pit lane, jump into their race car, and then they'd do, all of them would do half an hour. So you get, say, 30 laps of these cars, almost always in beautiful light because it was early in the morning. And that was my playtime. That was my time when I could go out and take a long lens or the lens that I wanted to work with, go to a corner and try and get something. And this picture of Jean Lacey is exactly that. It's not big in the frame. It's not particularly impressive, but for me, it has a certain atmosphere to it. He's the Formula One driver alone on his own, on his slightly, I love the Hungaroring, don't get me wrong, but it's slightly old school feel of Ricky Tinnis, and old tire barriers and that kind of thing. And the two, of course, the picture without the snorts of flame would be less than half the picture it is. Those two snorts of flame, particularly one on this side, almost look like, I don't know, they look like the Grinch, or is it the Cat in the Hat? I always think of it. It has that feel of an animal almost. And of course, when you take a picture like that and you get the snorts of flame, because back in the day we obviously had cameras with mirrors, so I didn't see that until very early Monday morning, something like 3 o'clock in the morning, when the film comes off the E6 processor and you get the loop on the transparency. People who are wondering what I'm talking about, and you just yelp like crazy because wham, I got it, because you're just so hoping for hours on end that you got that car.
Just hearing you describe those Sunday morning warm-ups makes me think straight away of the smell as well, because everything was a little bit too much oil in the car, a little bit, the tires were new, the brakes were new, everything was new. And because it was usually a crispy early morning, the sense of smell and aroma from the cars when they'd come in hot into the pit lane, or indeed out on the track, was very different from any other moment of the weekend.
It was.
And that sense of smell is absolutely critical, I think, to everything that we love about Formula One. And it's not so apparent today. I don't want to keep saying that any more than you do, but the sense of smell then, particularly as the fuels were so exotic as well, that was the other thing.
Well, some of those fuels. Was it 91 or 92? Oh. I couldn't go near the Williams with that elf fuel because I'd just
smelled
break
like old
out
socks,
into,
didn't it?
Yeah, and I'd just break out into a sneezing fit. So we talked about Monaco earlier at Lowe's hairpin. Other photographers would be looking at me like, what's the matter? Of course, they'd all start to realize because they'd all start to get it, or runny eyes, but the smell of that stuff, as you say. But the cars would come out on morning warm up and bit of smoke, bit of kind of drama to it. It was fantastic, and I miss morning warm up actually.
Oh, I do too. And actually, they would have made better races on several occasions, because quite often cars stop on lap 6 or 7, and it's an issue that would have been discovered in the Sunday morning warm up if we had one. We can't do it because it's too expensive or something. And I've got a campaign going at the moment to bring back spare cars as well, because I just can't believe the incremental cost of running a third car is so expensive that it's impossible to do given the amount of money that's spent on motorhomes and everything else that we have in Formula One. And spare cars would be a brilliant thing.
Yeah, I was describing that to someone recently that I was asked a similar point that related to the carbon footprint, and I said, well, how's the justification for the we so romantically still call them motorhomes, but these things are the FIA's, the Liberty's one, the Red Bull Energy Station, which I believe they will have 3 next year because they have one for the States, dedicated for the States. I may be wrong, but that's what I heard. But they have 15, 20, 25, 30 trucks taking these things around to races to provide an important base for communications, but really to provide lunch and dinner for the people who work with those particular companies. And I just think, well, there's priorities here. If you're going to say let's have net zero, let's show some real.
Well, let's really make the motorhomes and go back to everybody having a Winnebago.
Yeah. Let's be under an awning with bangers and mash.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, Darren, I'm sure it's time for you to go and have some bangers and mash dinner time in New Zealand, probably. What's life like in NZ? Are you a big cricket fan now? All Blacks rugby. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they live there, isn't it?
Yeah. It's. I thought when I came here that my children would be told off for kicking a ball, unless it was a funny shaped one. But but football, I know you would call it soccer, is very, very, very popular here, which is particularly with the younger generation.
Good.
Which is great to see. And motorsport has a really good following. As you know, there's a kind of generational interest in motorsport here. And I think New Zealand historically has punched above its weight in that sphere. And obviously we've had series in the past, Tasman races and stuff that have been important in their own right as a winter series. But life here is more relaxed than Europe, particularly London, where obviously you and I both lived. I miss the pace of London, the kind of the music, the fashion, the trends, the lifestyle. I spend a certain amount of time every year back there to see family, my parents and my brother and stuff. And I kind of have to take a day or two to get back up to speed. But once I am, I absolutely adore it. But I adore coming back here as well, just because life is easier here, much easier.
Porsche 993.
Yeah, that's tucked up in the garage. Does a few miles every other week just to keep the juices flowing. But it's growing
into a greater classic with every passing day, with its lines and its shape and its size.
It is. It's interesting when I took it to a Porsche dealership recently for some work, and everyone in the dealership was out looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, but you've got GT3s in here and RSs, and they're like, yeah, forget that. We want to see the old stuff. So
beautiful.
It's nice.
Darren, thanks so much for your time, mate. Really, really good to catch up. B, to talk about real life in Formula One, which we've got from you, from an artist as well. So
pleasure. Thanks, Peter. Really pleasure to see you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Darren.